Did you know that Memorial Day is one of the busiest travel holidays of the year? It's a dynamic holiday, and combined with the barrage of commercials and advertisements for legendary Memorial Day sales, it's not surprising that many Americans are distracted from the intent of Memorial Day. Through all the hoopla, Memorial Day emerges as a symbolic breakout from winter and the celebration of the warm summer months to come rather than what it is actually intended to be. Recent surveys confirm my suspicion, revealing that almost half of all Americans have no clue as to why Memorial Day is celebrated, and a good portion readily admit that they are unable to differentiate between Memorial Day, celebrated the last Monday in May, and Veterans Day, celebrated November 11th. Briefly, let me set the record straight. Memorial Day commemorates Americans killed in the line of duty, while Veterans Day recognizes the military service of U.S. veterans past and present. Let's take a quick dive into Memorial Day that will hopefully provide you a veteran's perspective, or at least through the lens of this veteran. A few years ago, I visited the American Cemetery in Manila, the capital of the Philippines. The cemetery is one of 26 American cemeteries managed by the federal government under the auspices of the American Battle Monuments Commission. The commission maintains military cemeteries in 17 foreign countries, providing a grave site for approximately 140,000 members of the U.S. Armed Forces who were killed in action overseas, mostly casualties from World War I and World War II. As we drove into the cemetery, I immediately noticed how meticulously the grounds were maintained. This is an observation made by most visitors. I was impressed and believe that this has to be one of the most beautiful monuments I had ever visited. But at the same time, I was overwhelmed viewing 17,000 precisely aligned white crosses, each marking the grave of an American that had been killed in action on the other side of the world. I thought about the horrendous grief that each cross represented across the entire nation. The family first had to cope with the news that a member of their family had been killed in action, and then come to grips with the awareness that their remains would be buried on the other side of the world. Sadly, many of the graves have never been visited by a member of the family due to the distance from home, and in some cases, there were not even any remains to be buried. The cemetery also has a vast commemoration wall displaying the names of an additional 36,000 service members that had no remains to bury, to include those lost at sea. Imagine the difficulty these families had coming to closure under these circumstances. As I wandered through the cemetery, I was reminded of General Mark Clark's autobiography. General Clark was the commanding general of the U.S. Fifth Army, which fought in Italy during World War II. In his book, Calculated Risk, the general recalls a visit he made to the American cemetery at Anzio, Italy, after the war. He eloquently expressed the sentiments I was feeling visiting the cemetery in Manila that day. He thought about the tremendous price that the U.S. and her allies had to pay for the liberation of Italy. The rows of crosses on display at Anzio provided testimony to that fact. General Clark summarized his visit with words that are often quoted. This quote is also carved into a commemorative stone at the American Cemetery at Normandy, France. It reads, and I quote General Clark, "On Memorial Day, we visited the American Cemetery at Anzio and saw the curving rows of white crosses that spoke eloquently of the price that America and her allies had paid for the liberation of Italy. If ever proof were needed that we fought for a cause and not for conquest, it could be found in these cemeteries. Here was our only conquest. All we asked of Italy was enough of her soil in which to bury our gallant dead." To me, Memorial Day means much more than a long weekend, the Indy 500, or car sales. The day is significant to those of us who have been to war and lost those we fought beside, as well as to families who lost a member of their family or close friend in the line of duty. Remembering their sacrifice is something we as a nation should never forget. Cape Cod Community College is proud of its student veterans and salutes them for their service to our nation. We also honor the memory of all the brave men and women who never returned home from the battlefield. May they rest in peace, knowing that a grateful nation will never forget their sacrifice.